Something just happened in Washington that almost no one is talking about the right way. This isn't noise, and it's not politics as usual. A classified document surfaced. Lawmakers saw it, and within hours something unprecedented followed. Members of both parties formally demanded the resignation of a sitting president. Not quietly, not symbolically, immediately. At the center of it all is a leaked memo that was never meant to leave secure rooms. According to multiple sources who reviewed it, Donald Trump allegedly interfered directly with active military operations for personal political gain, not indirectly, not through policy disputes, personally. The memo claims Trump ordered delays in critical military authorizations while sensitive national security operations were underway, not because of strategy, intelligence updates, or emerging threats, but because certain commanders had not publicly endorsed him. That detail changed everything. This wasn't a disagreement, it wasn't a power struggle, it was leverage, and lawmakers instantly understood what that meant. Delaying military operations isn't theoretical, it affects timelines, intelligence windows, and real people on the ground. That's why the reaction was so fast and so rare. Within hours of reviewing the memo, Republicans and Democrats began holding emergency discussions behind closed doors, and instead of circling the wagons or rushing to the cameras, they reached the same conclusion: this crossed a line that couldn't be defended. That's how a bipartisan group of 47 members of Congress came together to demand Trump's resignation. 31 Democrats, 16 Republicans. Calls like this almost never happen. They aren't triggered by political fights. They happen when lawmakers believe a president has violated the core of their constitutional duty. Several Republican members reportedly said remaining silent would make them complicit. That word matters. It means they believed real harm had already occurred, not just reputational damage, but national security risk. And this is where the story turns. Because Republicans had defended Trump through scandals, impeachments, and investigations before, this time they didn't. And the reason is simple. This wasn't about money, messaging, or misconduct. This was about the military. According to the memo, Trump allegedly instructed his chief of staff to delay authorization for 3 separate military operations. These were not routine actions. Sources say they involved time-sensitive intelligence and force protection measures in hostile regions. The delays were not tied to new information. They were tied to politics. The memo reportedly includes Trump's own words, stating that authorizations should be held until specific generals agreed to appear at campaign events and publicly praise his leadership. That single detail is what caused lawmakers to stop debating and start drafting a resignation demand, because once military readiness becomes a bargaining chip, every remaining defense collapses. What happened next explains why Washington went into full panic mode. After reviewing the memo, members of the House Armed Services Committee didn't leak, posture, or argue on television. They went into a secure facility and started asking one question: how did this get this far without anyone stopping it? According to sources familiar with the meeting, the atmosphere was tense and unusually quiet. Lawmakers weren't trading talking points, they were rereading sections of the memo line by line. Several immediately pointed out the same issue: this wasn't a gray area. If the allegations were accurate, the president hadn't just abused power, he had weaponized military readiness. That realization changed the tone instantly. Republican members, some of whom had defended Trump through previous controversies, reportedly said this was different. One source described the moment as the point where loyalty stopped being an option, because defending this wouldn't just be political risk, it would be moral exposure. The memo allegedly showed that Trump personally instructed his chief of staff to intervene with Pentagon leadership. The order wasn't to cancel operations, it was to delay them. That distinction matters. Delays create pressure without leaving fingerprints. They allow plausible deniability while still achieving leverage, and the leverage was clear. According to the document, Trump wanted specific generals to appear at campaign events and publicly praise his leadership before authorizations moved forward. Not policy endorsements, personal loyalty displays. For lawmakers who understood civil-military norms, this set off alarm bells. The military is not a campaign prop. Generals are not political validators. Once operational decisions depend on public loyalty rituals, civilian control becomes corrupted. That's when the discussion shifted from how do we respond to what are we obligated to do. Several members reportedly said ignoring the memo would make Congress complicit in endangering national security. That language wasn't rhetorical. It reflected genuine fear of future consequences. By the end of the meeting, the group agreed that silence was no longer an option. A formal response had to be immediate and public. Not a hearing, not a request for clarification, a resignation demand. Drafting the letter took hours. According to reporters who later obtained the text, the language was unusually direct. It accused Trump of violating his constitutional duties as commander-in-chief by subordinating national defense to personal political objectives. It explicitly stated that American lives may have been placed at risk. No hedging, No conditional phrasing. That alone made veteran lawmakers uneasy, because they knew what it would signal once released. Then came the moment no one expected. The letter wasn't read by a Democrat trying to score points. It was read on the House floor by Republican Congressman Michael McCaul, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a longtime Trump supporter. According to multiple reporters in the chamber, McCaul's voice shook as he read it. He said that as a military veteran and someone who had supported the president, he could not remain silent when evidence showed the commander-in-chief putting politics above the safety of American troops. That single moment detonated the political landscape. Once a Republican committee chairman publicly demanded resignation, the usual defenses collapsed. This could no longer be dismissed as partisan theater, and that's when history started echoing. Lawmakers began privately invoking Watergate, not because of optics, but because of patterns. When presidents lose their own party over national security, the endgame changes fast. Behind the scenes, Republican leadership went into crisis mode. Emergency calls, closed-door meetings, no consensus. Some wanted to attack the leak itself. Others said the substance mattered more than how it surfaced. The party wasn't just divided, it was paralyzed. Meanwhile, Trump was preparing his response, and what he chose to do next only intensified the crisis, because instead of addressing the allegations, he went on the attack. And that reaction raised a question no one in Washington could ignore. Trump's response didn't calm anything down. It did the opposite. Within hours of the resignation demand becoming public, he went on the offensive, posting a series of furious messages from the White House. He called the letter a hoax, dismissed the memo as fabricated, and framed the entire situation as a coordinated witch hunt by Democrats and weak Republicans. But what immediately stood out to legal analysts wasn't just the denial, it was the tone. Trump didn't focus on disproving the substance of the allegations. He focused on attacking the people who had signed the letter, and that choice mattered. He singled out Republican lawmakers by name, accusing them of betrayal and warning they would pay a price. To seasoned observers, this raised a red flag. If the memo was completely false, why escalate so aggressively? Why threaten members of Congress for exercising constitutional oversight? Behind the scenes, legal experts were already dissecting the implications. Former federal prosecutors across multiple networks made the same point. Attacking the process without addressing the substance often signals vulnerability, and in this case, the substance was explosive. According to the memo, Trump's actions potentially violated long-standing principles governing civil-military relations. The president does have broad authority over the military, but that authority is not personal property. It exists to serve national interests. Using it to extract political loyalty crosses a constitutional boundary. Jack Goldsmith, a former assistant attorney general and conservative legal scholar, publicly stated that if the allegations were accurate, Trump had violated his fundamental duties as commander-in-chief. He emphasized that discretion does not equal impunity. Delaying operations for personal benefit undermines the entire foundation of civilian control. Even analysts who had previously defended Trump acknowledged the seriousness. They noted that this wasn't about policy disagreements or command decisions. It was about motive. Once motive becomes personal political gain, the legal landscape changes dramatically. Another issue quickly surfaced: potential criminal exposure. Former prosecutors explained that using government resources, especially military operations, to benefit a political campaign may violate federal statutes. Delaying operations to coerce public endorsements isn't just an abuse of power, it could be unlawful. And that realization started spreading through Capitol Hill. Republican lawmakers now faced an impossible dilemma. On one side was Trump's base, which views any criticism as betrayal and demands total loyalty. On the other side was evidence suggesting that defending Trump meant justifying behavior that endangered troops. There was no clean defense. If the memo was real, the conduct was indefensible. If it was fake, then multiple senior lawmakers from both parties were lying about what they reviewed in a secure facility. Neither explanation worked. As this pressure mounted, comparisons to past presidential crises intensified. During Watergate, Nixon didn't collapse because of public outrage alone. He collapsed when Republican leaders privately concluded they could no longer defend him. Lawmakers began asking the same question now: how long can this be sustained? The difference this time was speed. In previous scandals, pressure built over months. Here it exploded in days. And unlike past controversies, this one struck at the military, an institution traditionally insulated from politics. That's when military voices entered the conversation. Veterans groups and former officers began speaking publicly about the danger of politicizing operations. They warned that once commanders are pressured to perform loyalty rituals, trust within the chain of command erodes, orders become suspect, readiness suffers. Active duty service members couldn't speak openly. But polling data told its own story. Surveys showed overwhelming opposition to using military operations as political leverage. For many lawmakers, that was the breaking point. This wasn't just about Trump anymore. It was about precedent. If a president can delay operations to extract endorsements and face no consequences, then national defense becomes negotiable. Behind closed doors, more Republicans reportedly began requesting access to the memo. They wanted to see it themselves before choosing sides. That detail alone terrified party leadership. Once lawmakers read the document, the odds of further defections increased. Trump's legal team, meanwhile, focused on investigating the leak rather than refuting the allegations. That strategy drew immediate criticism. Legal experts warned that attacking the messenger while ignoring the message only deepened suspicion. And as the days passed, one reality became unavoidable. This crisis was no longer contained, because the question everyone was now asking wasn't whether the memo was damaging. It was how much damage had already been done, and who would break next. As this crisis deepened, the focus quietly shifted from Washington insiders to the people most affected by the allegations: military families. For them, this wasn't an abstract constitutional debate. It was personal. The idea that operational decisions could be delayed for political loyalty struck at the heart of trust between service members and civilian leadership. Behind the scenes, Republican strategists understood the danger immediately. National security has always been one of the few issues that transcends party lines. Once that trust is broken, political damage becomes unpredictable. Lawmakers began receiving calls from veterans, donors, and military families asking the same question: why is no one being held accountable? Polling data only intensified the pressure. Surveys conducted in the aftermath of the leak showed overwhelming opposition among active duty personnel to using military operations as political leverage. For a party that has long branded itself as the defender of the armed forces, the optics were devastating. This also reshaped the electoral landscape almost overnight. Republican candidates across the country were suddenly forced to answer a question they had hoped to avoid. Do you stand with a president accused of endangering troops for personal gain, or do you break ranks? Silence was no longer an option. Every non-answer became an answer. Democratic strategists moved quickly, framing the issue not as a partisan scandal, but as a betrayal of military trust. Ads were reportedly already in production, featuring veterans and military families, asking why loyalty to one man mattered more than national defense. That framing was difficult to counter. Inside the Republican Party, fear of a domino effect grew. Once one senior committee chairman publicly called for resignation, others felt exposed. More lawmakers quietly requested access to the classified memo. Leadership knew that every additional reader increased the risk of further defections. History offered an uncomfortable lesson. In moments like Watergate, collapse didn't come from public outrage alone. It came when party leaders concluded that defending the president was more dangerous than abandoning him. That calculation was now happening in real time, and yet Trump remained defiant. His team doubled down on attacking the leak, framing it as illegal and politically motivated. But that strategy carried its own risk. The more attention focused on the leak, the more people asked why the allegations themselves weren't being disproven. Legal experts warned that ignoring the substance could backfire. If additional documentation surfaced, or if whistleblowers stepped forward, the damage would multiply. And with more members of Congress reviewing the memo, that possibility grew by the day. This left the country facing a larger question than Trump himself. If a president can allegedly delay military operations to extract political loyalty and face no immediate consequences, what limits actually exist? What stops future presidents from doing the same, or worse? That's why this moment matters beyond one administration. It's about whether national defense remains insulated from personal ambition. It's about whether the commander-in-chief role still carries constraints, or whether those constraints exist only on paper. As of now, more Republicans are reportedly considering adding their names to the resignation demand. Trump's legal team is preparing counterattacks. Military families are watching closely, and Washington knows something the public is only beginning to understand. This story isn't over, not even close. Because once military readiness becomes a bargaining chip, the damage doesn't end with one president. It defines what comes next.